thank you guys all for joining us today for our third talk of our winter lecture series. For those of you who haven't joined us for one of these talks so far, this is a new program for us here at the DuPont Nature Center. We wanted to take the opportunity in the wintertime when things really kind of slow down for us here to still continue to find ways to bring new programming. One of the best actual parts, though, during the wintertime when things slow down for us is we get time to catch up with other people we work with in our division, especially in the Division of Fish and Wildlife, and catch up on all the cool work that they're doing throughout the state. So with this series, we kind of put those two things together to take this opportunity to deliver some cool programming about some of the great projects that these some of our coworkers are doing up and down Delaware when it comes to conserving, managing, understanding wildlife. So today we're going to be joined by Ashley Kennedy, who's going to be talking all about ticks. Before we do get started, though, I want to again, of course, thank everyone for joining us. If you have questions, for those of you who are here, feel free to just raise your hand, let her know. For those of you who are watching online, if you do have questions, as a reminder, your cameras and your microphones are turned off. So just write your questions into the chat and we'll make sure we get to them all at the very end of the program. So again, today we're joined by Ashley Kennedy, a tick biologist with DNREC's Division of Fish and Wildlife in the Mosquito Control Section. I think if I polled everyone who came to visit the DuPont Nature Center, I don't know if I'd find anyone who would willingly say they enjoy ticks. But I think every single person would say they have to deal with ticks at one point or another in their life. And that's one of the main reasons I'm very excited to have Ashley here to talk all about the species you see in Delaware, how to keep yourself protected from these little bloodsuckers and more. And so with that said, since we don't get who has a chance to talk to a certified tick expert, right? So I'm going to let Ashley come on in and do her program. And again, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Patrick, for that introduction. And thanks for coming. I know next week is horseshoe crabs. I think those are maybe a little more lovable than ticks. Everything's more lovable than ticks. But like Patrick said, they're important. Everyone has to deal with them, right? So here in Delaware, we have sort of a unique honor of we're not only in the top 10 states for the incidence of Lyme disease, which is of course tick-borne, but also spotted fever rickettsiosis, another tick-borne disease. We're in the top 5 states for ehrlichiosis, and we're in the top 2. We're just second only to Arkansas for a newly discovered tick-associated condition called alpha-gal syndrome. It's also called the mammalian meat allergy. So yes, a tick bite can actually make you allergic to meat products. And if you're looking at it county by county, Newcastle County ranks 6th in the nation for Lyme disease incidence. So we're a small state by geography and by population, but we do shoulder an outsized share of the national tick-borne disease burden. And just to note that this is something that I've experienced personally. I've been a patient of Lyme disease, and actually the lower right picture is a picture of my husband with his Lyme disease rash. So I use him as my poster child. And this data was shared with me from the Division of Public Health. We have a really fantastic vector-borne disease epidemiologist there. And this is just case data for tick-borne diseases in Delaware. We've got Lyme disease, anaplasmosis, babesiosis, and then 2 different kinds of ehrlichiosis. And per the CDC, all of these numbers likely are very much underestimates. They're probably about 10% of the actual total because these cases do tend to be underreported and underdiagnosed. So here's a little bit about the background or the origins of the state tick program that I run. It goes all the way back to 2014, and that's when the General Assembly convened a Lyme disease prevention task force. So there were advocates, Lyme disease patient advocates who noticed how rampant this disease was and asked the state to step up and do something about it. And so they submitted a final report to the legislature, which subsequently voted to begin a state tick program, and they decided it would be within the Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control and within the mosquito control section. And it officially got off the ground in March 2019. This is a photo of Dr. Lauren Maestas, who is my predecessor in this role, but I came on board in 2020 and have been finding it to be very interesting and fulfilling work ever since then. So happy to be here. There are three broad aims of the Delaware State Tick program. The first one is surveillance. So basically, we're trying to answer some pretty basic questions, fill in some knowledge gaps, because before the state tick program existed, very little work had been done on ticks in the state. So we didn't really know, like, what kind of ticks do we have here? When and where are people most likely to encounter them? What pathogens are they carrying, and what percentage of each tick species is carrying these different pathogens? So just really trying to get a handle on what is the tick situation in Delaware. We also do outreach and education. So I maintain a series of web pages, and you can find them all through de.gov/ticks. So hopefully that's really easy to remember. And there's pages on there about what you can do about ticks around your home or to protect your pets, and so on and so forth. We also do social media posts just to kind of raise awareness, make sure people are thinking about ticks and the risks they pose, and then talks like this one. And then lastly, we're trying to investigate tick management measures. Because if you were to read through the scientific literature about different studies with different tick control measures, unfortunately, we're still at a stage where we don't have a magic bullet that's going to just eradicate ticks and work well in all situations. So there's a variety of different techniques that have been used, and not all of them work in all places or against all tick species. So we're trying to figure out which ones are going to work best for us here in Delaware. But the bread and butter of what we do is surveillance. And the number one surveillance activity we do is called tick dragging. And it's you can see it here. We have basically a white flag. It's very unsophisticated, but it's very effective. So it's basically, you've got a wooden dowel with a meter square of white canvas on it. And you walk along the trails. We usually do this in the state parks and state wildlife areas and national wildlife refuges. So we're on trails where people might pick up ticks, and we drag the flag over the vegetation, and ticks that are waiting in the vegetation to grab onto the host will grab onto the flag. They think it's, some kind of animal going by. And because it's on a white backdrop, it's easy for us to spot them. So we can pull them off the flag and pop them into a little vial of ethanol to preserve them. And we take them back to the lab, identify them, screen them for pathogens. So we're doing this year round. Unfortunately, we don't get a break from ticks at any point during the year, not even in the middle of winter. If it is consistently below freezing, that will lead to the ticks not being as active. But as long as temperatures are above freezing, you will find them. And we additionally collect ticks directly from their hosts, and that helps us to learn more about the ways that they interact with other species. So it gives us, insight into their ecology and what kinds of pathogens they might be picking up, because different wildlife species are reservoirs for different kinds of pathogens. So one of the main activities we do is small mammal trapping. So we set up live traps so we can later, release the animals unharmed and arguably in better shape because we removed their ticks for them. So we collect squirrels and mice and shrews, voles. We even team up with other biologists within Division of Fish and Wildlife to do mist netting to catch bats. We also look at the medium-sized mammals, and this is done in collaboration with USDA Wildlife Services. So they trap and remove foxes and raccoons and sometimes opossums from the beaches where threatened and endangered shorebirds are nesting to protect their eggs and their nestlings. And so we team up with them to pull the ticks and the other ectoparasites like fleas and lice off of those. All right, my screen just went back to the beginning. But it looks like the right slide is still up there.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so we have learned a lot about the different interactions that.
Sorry, a little technical difficulties. Yeah, what I'm gonna do is just that.
Okay.
Pop back in.
Yeah, it looked like the right slide was displaying up there, but
Yeah.
not here. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Patrick. And then what's next? All right. We also will go to hunter check stations to pull ticks directly off of hunter harvested game. So in November, during that first week of open firearm season for white-tailed deer, we'll pull ticks off of deer. And then in April, we'll be pulling ticks off of wild turkeys. And then this one is a little gross. We'll opportunistically salvage roadkill to pull ticks off of those species as well. So it's a little gruesome, but we've learned a lot from this. It's been really interesting at the same time. And lastly, we team up with some ornithologists around the state who are doing mist netting for birds. So typically bird banding stations. And so we'll pull ticks off of passerines or songbirds as well. Now, all of those things that I was just talking about fall under the umbrella of active surveillance. We're actively out trying to collect ticks from as many different places and hosts as possible. But we also have passive surveillance, and this is more like crowdsourcing. So we're letting the ticks come to us. So other people are doing the hard work. So we have a whole team of participating veterinary clinics. Sometimes we get ticks submitted directly from pet owners if they find ticks on their dogs or cats or other pets. Also wildlife rehabilitators, other professionals that work with animals. And then we have ticks that people find on themselves. That's usually coming in through my colleagues in the Division of Fish and Wildlife, but anyone can send us a tick if they want to contribute it. So from all of these different activities, we now have a pretty good handle on what kind of ticks we have for starters. And can I just ask people to guess, like if you had to just guess, how many different types of tick do you think we have in Delaware? Most people have heard of a few, maybe two or three of the deer tick. We definitely Lone Star, yep. Dog tick, yeah, those are like the big three human biters. But through our efforts, we've actually learned that we have 19 different tick species in Delaware. Most of these you would never have to worry about. A lot of these are wildlife specialists that very rarely would bite people. And those three that you mentioned are the three that I highlighted in red here because those are the ones that we're the most worried about. The ones that are most likely to bite a person. And on this list, numbers 13 through 19 were all species that we detected through the efforts of the state tick program. The other ones had been previously reported. It's kind of interesting, like back in 1945, there was a paper published about ticks in Delaware, and they listed 8 species, so the first 8 on this list, but they said that out of those 8, only 5 were actually established, actually surviving and reproducing in the state, and the others were just ones that they would get occasionally on like a migratory bird passing through. But some of those species subsequently became established here. So it does seem like as time has gone on, as winters become milder, we've got some tick species that have been kind of creeping north, expanding their range, and so they've become very comfortably settled in Delaware when they did not used to occur here. So I know everyone here like knows what a tick is, and but it might be the kind of thing where you know it when you see it, but you can't necessarily define it. So I want to kind of define like what is a tick? How do you really know that you're looking at a tick when you see one? So we're taking like the 10,000-foot view, and I'm going to walk you through its taxonomy, starting with, of course, ticks are animals. So in the kingdom Animalia, this means they're multicellular. They can move, they can eat, they can reproduce. But if you go one step down on the ladder, they belong to the phylum Arthropoda. So the arthropods, what they have in common is they have a hard exoskeleton, they have jointed appendages, and they have a segmented body plan. So I couldn't resist throwing the horseshoe crab picture in here too. That's one of my favorite arthropods. And then one step down, the class Arachnida. So I'm sure, heard of arachnids and usually associate that with spiders. So just like spiders, ticks have 8 legs, and they have 2 major body parts. But this group also includes scorpions and harvestmen and a few other groups. And then below that, ticks belong to the subclass Acari, which is the mites. And usually we think of mites as super, super tiny. Like we think of like, mites and dust particles, basically. Ticks just happen to be larger mites that you can usually see without a magnifying glass or a microscope. And then ticks comprise the order Exodida. So Within that order, there's 3 families. I only listed 2 here because one of them doesn't occur in Delaware or even in North America. But the 2 families of ticks that we have here are Exotidae, which is the hard-bodied ticks, and Argacidae, which is the soft ticks. So the one in the lower right here is a soft tick. It's got a pretty unusual look to it. It's kind of leathery and soft and squishy. Real quick, this is the tick life cycle. And most of the ticks that we care about, the ones that are most likely to bite people, are called 3-host ticks. And that's because if they're going to complete their life cycle, if they're going to go from hatching out of their egg to, at the end of their life, successfully laying eggs of their own, they need to take 3 blood meals. They have to find 3 different hosts and feed on their blood in order to get through that life cycle. So it starts in that upper left. We've got a female tick who lays eggs on the ground. Larval ticks will hatch out of those eggs, and they're going to hopefully find their first host, which tends to be a small mammal. There's a chipmunk shown here, but it could be a mouse, a bird, etc. The larvae, which only have 6 legs, by the way, so they don't get that 4th pair of legs until the next stage. The larvae will feed on a small mammal or other small animal, and they'll get enough blood to let them molt and drop off the host drop off the host first, then molt into the next life cycle stage, which is called the nymph. So the nymphs do have 8 legs by this point. They'll take a second blood meal, drop off, molt again into the adult and final stage. And then the adults need to take 1 more meal, and that's going to give the female tick the protein she needs to be able to lay eggs. And just as a fun, horrifying fact, a female tick can lay between 4,000 and 20,000 eggs. I'm going to go over some of the parts of a tick, and because this is going to help us in tick identification. And tick identification is really important. I mean, to a lot of people, a tick is a tick. They're all bad, but they're not all equally dangerous. So there's some tick bites that you would want to take more seriously than others. Different species are associated with different risks. So on this tick, A refers to the palps, which are sensory appendages. B is called the hypostome, and I think of that as a little harpoon. So that's what they will lodge into the host skin. It's got backwards projecting barbs so that they can really anchor themselves in there. So if you've ever been bitten by a tick, you know that you can't just easily flick it off. You really have to tug on it to pull it out. And that's because of that hypostome that anchors it in. C is It's technically called the basis capitulum. You can think of it as a head, but I've got head in quotation marks here because it's not a true head. It doesn't contain a brain because their nervous system is very different from ours. But it's the part that the mouth part's attached to, so it kind of looks like a head. D I have on there just to remind you that ticks have 8 legs, where 6 is larvae. E refers to the dorsal shield or the scutum. So it's this tough plate that's going to protect them like armor. It makes them hard to squish. And then the last thing, F, is the idiosoma. So that's the softer part of their body it's kind of like a sac, and it can swell and distend with blood as they feed. So a tick can grow to many, many times their original size and weight by that idiosoma just filling up. The scutum is a really important feature because it helps in ID. Some species have patterns or specific colors or shapes that you want to look for. And then also you can use the scutum to tell if your tick is a male or a female, because in adult males, the scutum covers the entire back, and in females, it only goes halfway down the back. And that's because she needs that idiosoma to be able to fill with blood so that she can get lots of nutrients to lay lots of eggs. The males will still feed on blood. They only need a little bit to keep them going. They just don't need as big a meal. One thing I wanted to point out is that tick size isn't very helpful in identification. It can't really tell you what kind of tick you're dealing with. And I think this is a frequent misconception, because I've had a lot of people tell me oh, I know that I was bitten by a deer tick because it was so small. But what I have here in this picture, there's a dime on the left, and then the top row of ticks is the Lone Star tick. We've got a larva, a nymph, an adult male, and an adult female. And then below that is the black-legged tick or the deer tick. So we've got a larva, a nymph, adult male, and adult female. So you can see that if you're controlling for life cycle stage, the black-legged tick or deer tick is a little bit smaller than the Lone Star tick, but really the size varies much more by the life cycle stage. So if you had an immature Lone Star tick, it's going to be smaller than an adult black-legged tick. And the size can also vary based on other things. Like there's going to be individual variation, usually associated with how much nutrition they're getting, and also as they engorge with blood, that can dramatically grow and change their shape as well. So these are all images of black-legged ticks, and they've just been feeding for different lengths of time. So the first one is unfed, feeding for 0 hours. Then one's been feeding for a day, 2 days, and 3 days, and so on. And a tick, to get a full blood meal, a tick might be attached for 7 to 10 days. So they can get really big. So I'm not going to go through all 19 of our Delaware tick species because, like I said, some of them just aren't that important from a public health standpoint. But I did want to talk about some of the major players, the ones we really have to worry about. And I figured I might as well start with the most notorious one. So the black-legged tick, also known as the deer tick. The scientific name is Ixodes scapularis. And this one, it's the most dangerous to us because it carries the most pathogens. It can carry the causative agent of Lyme disease, anaplasmosis, babesiosis, and Powassan virus. That's actually that's just a sampling. Those are like 4 of the most important ones, but there's at least 7 pathogens that this one can carry. And one thing that's particularly noteworthy here is that it's not just a lot of pathogens, but it's a lot of different kinds of pathogens. So you would not treat Powassan virus with the same treatment that you would treat a bacterial illness like Lyme disease. So, I mentioned this because, many times if you go to the doctor and report a tick bite, their kind of default treatment regimen would be to prescribe antibiotics, and that would be the gold standard treatment if you were in fact infected with Lyme disease or with another bacterial tick-borne infection. But if you have Powassan virus, that's not going to help you. And even if you had babesiosis, that disease is actually more closely related to malaria, and so it's not caused by a bacteria. It's caused by a protozoan parasite, basically. So again, a different kind of treatment would be warranted. So something to keep in mind if you try antibiotics and you're still feeling sick afterwards. And some tips to recognize the black-legged tick: they have sort of a teardrop body shape. They have a dark brown scutum and dark legs. And that's in contrast with a reddish brown idiosoma. And they have long mouth parts. I realize people pointed out to me that the shape of the size or length of the mouth parts, that can be a feature that you kind of have to, it can take a while to learn how to get used to that because you maybe have to look at a lot of ticks before you can tell if they are long or short. But as we go through, I'll point out once they have short ones. So this is another tick with long mouth parts. This is the Lone Star tick, Amblyomma americanum. This is our number 2 public health threat because this is the tick that's associated with alpha-gal syndrome or mammalian meat allergy. And it can also vector several different bacterial pathogens. So there's a couple here that cause ehrlichiosis, and then there's the causative agent of tularemia. And although these have not been detected in Delaware yet, Heartland virus and Bourbon virus have been found in Lone Star ticks and even in some of our neighboring states. So I think it might just be a matter of time before we're dealing with those here too. So again, different kinds of pathogens that would require different kinds of treatment. And this tick can be recognized by having sort of a round crab-like body shape. They tend to be reddish brown, got those long mouth parts. If you get an adult female, that one's pretty easy to recognize because she'll have a white dot on her back. The males don't have that, and the immatures don't have that. But if you get a male, it'll have flecks of white around the sides, like around the edges of its scutum. And if you get the immatures, one clue might be you often will get not just one. You might get dozens to hundreds of them at the same time because they often will be questing. That means they're looking for a host all in a dense aggregation. So I've heard people kind of colloquially refer to them as tick bombs. You walk through a meadow and then your pants are covered in ticks. You've experienced a larval tick bomb. The American dog tick, Dermacentor variabilis, uh, is well established in Delaware. You can find it all throughout the state. And this one can carry the agents of spotted fever rickettsiosis and tularemia. Now, if I had to choose, like gun to my head, if I had to choose one of these 3 ticks to bite me, this would be my pick because um, it's associated with fewer pathogens, and also when we've been testing them here, we're finding very, very, very low rates of infection, whereas we're finding higher rates of infection with those other 2 species. So if this one bites you, I would say there's a less than 1% chance that you'll get sick from it. That's much. I would say I'll say 3 to 5% for the Lone Star tick and 25 to 50% for the black-legged tick. Those are your odds. So this dog tick can be recognized by having an oval body shape. It's relatively large, and people are only really bitten by the adults. I've never heard of someone in Delaware being bitten by a larval or a nymphal dog tick. And their scutum has this kind of ornate marbled appearance that contrasts with the rest of the body is going to be dark brown. And this one has short mouth parts, so I'll go back real quick to the Lone Star tick. So if you're looking at this part up top and then look at the dog tick, it's a little shorter and stubbier. Now next up is the Gulf Coast tick, Amblyomma maculatum. This one is also an aggressive human biter. Fortunately, it's only been linked to one human illness, and that's spotted fever rickettsiosis. This is a relatively new arrival in Delaware. It's been here since about 2013. It's called the Gulf Coast tick because it used to be restricted to the Gulf Coast. You wouldn't find it more than 100 miles inland from the Gulf Coast, but now it's all the way up to New England. Um, and I know this is like a really nerdy tick biologist thing to say, but I would say this one's my favorite. I think it's the prettiest. If you're looking at it under the microscope, but it almost kind of shines with this golden ornate pattern, but it has a nasty bite, so I don't actually, want to keep one as a pet or anything. Next up is the longhorn tick, Hemophysalis longicornis. And this is one of our newest arrivals. It was first detected in Delaware in 2019, and it's not a native species in North America. It's from Eastern Asia. And it was first found in New Jersey in 2017, and it's spread to like 20 states since then. Some good news is it doesn't really bite people much. We have several records of human bites in Delaware, but most of the ones we're getting submitted are coming in from dogs. It loves dogs. And as far as we know, it hasn't been linked to any human illness in the United States, but I say that with some reservation because in its native range in East Asia, it is associated with a whole range of different pathogens and different diseases. And at least in laboratory settings, they've been shown to be able to carry a whole laundry list of different pathogens. So time will tell. Maybe this is one we really need to keep an eye on. And you can recognize this one because it's kind of monochromatic. It's solid color. There's no contrast between the scutum and the rest of the body. It's got short mouth parts that if you see it under a microscope, you can tell that they project out to the sides. And then just kind of a fun fact about this one. In the United States, there are no males of this tick. Every single one that's been collected is a female. So they're parthenogenetic, which means that the female can lay viable eggs without ever having mated with a male. Now, where they come from in East Asia, they have a bisexually reproducing population that's about 50% males and 50% females. But over here, it just takes one single tick to start a new population because she can just, just lay thousands of eggs without ever mating. So that's one of the reasons that they've been such a prolific invader and being able to spread across the country. Next up is the winter tick, Dermacentor albopictus. Luckily, this is another one that doesn't go after people much. It's a specialist on cervids, so deer, moose, and elk. And here in Delaware, we only have deer in that category. Interesting fact about these are one host ticks. So earlier I was saying that most of the ticks that we care about from a medical standpoint are three host ticks where they need to feed on three separate hosts. And so there'll be 3 times in their life when they're questing, looking for a host. But these ticks will quest only once. So the larvae hatch out of the eggs and they'll stick their legs out waiting for deer to go by. They grab on and they will stay on that deer for their whole life cycle. So they'll feed, molt into a nymph on the deer, feed again, molt into an adult on the deer. So their host can develop these really intense infestations. And it's been a bigger problem up in New England where they have moose. And there's really sad articles about this where they've described what's called ghost moose. And these are moose that have such severe tick burden, so many thousands of ticks on them, that they're dying by exsanguination and also by exposure to the cold because they're so itchy from the tick bites that they'll rub their hair off on trees trying to scratch all the bites. So it's really sad. I have a stat here. It says a figure here. The New Hampshire moose population dropped from 7,500 to 4,500 just because of these ticks. Now, some good news for us is that our deer, our white-tailed deer and our Sika deer, they don't seem to be as severely affected. And experts think that's because the deer are better at grooming themselves so they can remove the ticks before they reach these really intense infestations. So, but up in New England, they're counting, they've found moose with over 100,000 ticks on them. So, these have short mouth parts, an unpatterned scutum, and they're usually associated with deer. So the only human bites that we get for these, it's usually from hunters or other people who are in close contact with deer. All right, now this one I threw in kind of just for fun. It's not one you have to worry about, I think, knock on wood. But it has a unique connection to this very building. So this is called the fowl tick, Argus persicus. It's native to the Middle East and the Mediterranean region. And as the name suggests, fowl tick, it feeds on poultry. And to date, there's only ever been one specimen of this tick collected in Delaware. So I have no reason to believe that it's established here, but it's this big mystery because it was an employee working here at the DuPont Nature Center who found this tick crawling on them. This was in June 2021. And, that person had no recent travel history. They had no recent contact with poultry or other birds. So, how did this tick get on them? We just don't know. And we did some really targeted searching to try and find more of them because I thought surely if they have this one, there's going to be more. So we put out tick traps here at the Nature Center for a couple summers in a row. They didn't work. A tick trap, by the way, is basically a cooler full of dry ice, and you drill a couple holes in it, and then as the dry ice melts, it lets off carbon dioxide. So the ticks think it's a host breathing out carbon dioxide, so they'll come and then they get stuck on double-sided tape on the outside of the cooler. But that didn't work. We also got permission to check some of the barn swallow nests that are on the outside of the building, because barn swallows are a recorded host for this species. They prefer chickens, but in a pinch they'll feed on barn swallows. So at the end of the season, when the nests were vacant, we collected some of them and dissected them, trying to find more ticks, and we didn't find any. So, normally I wouldn't even mention it. I wouldn't want to freak you out about this tick because it was only just one specimen, so probably not something that we have here actually established, surviving, reproducing. But I wanted to mention it both because of the connection to this very building, and then also because if it did turn up, like if there are more of them out there, this is really bad news for Delaware because obviously poultry is a pretty big industry here. So these ticks, they don't just feed on chickens, but they can transmit lots of different pathogens to them. Sure.
Just hit me with the barn swallow nest.
Mm-hmm.
To my house every spring. I get a pair of barn swallows that nest in the lake fixture right over top, and they're double brooded. So after she fledges the first brood, she'll use that. And then what I do is in the winter, when I think everything's good, I take that nest out, clean it all off, and just throw it in my compost pile. Now I'm going to look for
Well, thank you. And if you find some, you better call me.
Yeah. Was that Lynn who got the?
Yes, I wasn't sure if
I was volunteering.
Okay, great.
I thought
Yeah.
she told me she Job something.
Yeah.
Like,
So I'm not sure if people on the Zoom or on the Teams heard that, but we were talking about barn swallow nests and keeping an eye out for these ticks in nests. So if anyone has the opportunity, yeah,
right
and
at the
even if
front
it's
door, right at the front
some other kind of tick, I'll take it. Um,
door.
so just given how dangerous this one is for chickens, we want to be super vigilant, even though with one specimen, knock on wood, it's not established. Oh, actually, let me go back real quick. This is a soft tick. So I mentioned most of the ticks that we have here are hard ticks, and then this one looks really weird. It's got this like pebbled, leathery appearance, and then if you're looking at it from above, you would not see its mouth parts at all because they're on the underside instead of being like in front. So, and soft ticks compared to hard ticks, they have a very different life history. So instead of, you think about ticks questing for a host, they're going to climb up on a blade of grass and stick their legs out and wait for a host to go by. These ones don't go through all that effort. They like to stay comfortably in a bird's nest for like their whole life cycle. So they just move right into where the host is living, so they don't have to work too hard. All right, so this chart just shows some of the numbers of ticks that we've collected since the program began for our 5 major species. And I don't want you to be alarmed by how we've collected greater numbers of ticks in more recent years. Mostly that reflects greater effort. So the tick program, as it's gotten more established, we have more staff now, so we're able to spend more time doing surveillance. So it's not that the actual tick population is growing year to year, luckily. Um, and in any given year, Lone Star ticks actually make up about 97% of the ticks that we collect. So which is really incredible when you think they weren't established here 40 years ago. So as far as we know, they first turned up in the late 90s. So you can see, yeah, Lone Star ticks are the biggest one by the numbers, but we do get enough. Oh, sure. Very good question.
Are they the itchiest?
Are they the itchiest? Actually, yes. Um, and
That's my.
and that's because of those long mouth parts. When they bite you, they're actually penetrating deeper into the skin than other ticks are. So it does leave a nastier bite. And so maybe a little bit of good news is just because you have a really itchy, nasty looking tick bite, it doesn't necessarily mean it's infected with anything. There's enough stuff in tick saliva, like different compounds that will make your body react that you can have a really intense reaction to it, but it doesn't necessarily mean you've been infected with a pathogen. This map shows for our top 3 human biting species, like where you're the most likely to encounter them. So you can see the red color corresponds to the Lone Star tick. So from southern Newcastle County, basically below the canal on down through the rest of the state, that species really dominates. And then up in northern Newcastle County, we don't get as many of them. We see more black-legged ticks and American dog ticks. And this next map shows kind of the same thing, but in this one, the size of the circle gives you an idea of how big that population is. So you can see Sussex County really is hardest hit as far as sheer tick numbers go. And
Is that big dot Cape Henlopen State Park?
yes, it is. The big dot we were just saying is Cape Henlopen State Park. And yeah, and I keep this map in mind when I get calls or complaints from the public. If someone calls me from Hockessin with those itty bitty little circles up there, I'm not going to take their complaint as yeah, I'm going to take it with a grain of salt compared to someone calling me from near Redden State Forest or Cape Henlopen where there's a really significant tick problem by the numbers. I have some graphs that show the seasonality for our 3 major human biting species. This tells you like when they're active. It says 2022 because I was using 2022 data to make these graphs, but that was like a pretty standard year for us. So the same pattern will hold true for other years. So in this one, you can see the larvae are coming for the black-legged tick. The larvae are really active in the late summer. The nymphs are active in the late spring, like May, June. And then the adults, weirdly, are active in the late fall and throughout the winter and into the early spring. So you can get a tick bite in the middle of winter. And if you do get a tick bite in the middle of winter, it's probably an adult black-legged tick, which is going to be your most dangerous kind of tick bite, the one that you really want to be proactive and seek medical treatment for. Because um, one thing I forgot to mention when I was on the life cycle page, an adult tick, when they bite you, they're taking their third and final blood meal of their life cycle. So that means they've previously fed on 2 other hosts before they got to you. So they've had 2 exposures, like 2 opportunities to pick up pathogens. Whereas a nymphal tick has had 1 meal before it gets to you, so it's had 1 possible exposure. And then if a larval tick bites you, it hasn't had any previous exposures. You're the first meal, so it might leave you that really itchy bite, but it's not going to infect you with a pathogen. So when we test the ticks, we see that adults tend to be twice as infected as nymphs. So if you get bitten by a tick in the middle of the winter, it's probably an adult black-legged tick, and it has a pretty good chance of being infected with something. This is the same thing, but for the Lone Star ticks. And this is one that's not usually active in the winter, although we do get some one-offs. Like we did get one February 11th one year, which was very, very, very early for this species. But usually um, the nymphs and the adults are active around the same time in the late spring and continuing through the summer. And then the larvae come out a little bit later in the late summer in pretty extraordinary numbers. And then for the American dog tick, I only include the adults on this one because the immatures don't bite people. But you can see they have kind of this bimodal seasonality where they come out in the late spring and then again kind of in mid to late summer. Now we are testing the ticks for pathogens, and this is some of our preliminary results. So out of the first 689 black-legged ticks or deer ticks that we tested, statewide, 33% of them were positive for the agent of Lyme disease. And there's some hotspots throughout the state where it was even higher, closer to 60%. There's another illness linked to them called tick-borne relapsing fever. That's in the next column. It says the number positive for Borrelia miyamotoi. And so about 4% of them statewide are testing positive for that. About 2% of them statewide are testing positive for the agent of babesiosis. That's that disease that's a lot like malaria. And then lastly, a little over 1% of them are testing positive for the agent of anaplasmosis. And this shows our preliminary testing results for the Lone Star tick. So this is different diseases. It doesn't carry any of the same pathogens that the black-legged tick can carry. But out of the first 527 that we tested, about 5% of them statewide are positive for an agent that causes ehrlichiosis. Unfortunately, none of them have tested positive for the agent of tularemia so far. Knock on wood. And I actually did not include a table for the American dog ticks. We've tested over 500 of them as well, and they were negative for all pathogens. So when I said earlier there's a less than 1% chance they can infect you with something, I mean, our data suggests it's probably closer to 0%, but I've said 1% to just kind of hedge my bets. And then this shows what kind of ticks Delaware pets are encountering. So we do have that passive surveillance program with veterinary clinics. And you can see there, most of our ticks are coming in from dogs and cats, and they're encountering Lone Star ticks, American dog ticks, longhorn ticks, and black-legged ticks. So basically the same ones that people get with longhorn ticks jump out at me as being much, much more prevalent on dogs than they are on people. And some of these are listed as other hosts, and that included some rabbits and some goats. That's actually a goat that I removed ticks from myself. And then there's a lot that are unknown hosts, and that's because the labels were filled out incompletely. So likely a lot of cats and dogs, we just couldn't say for sure which one it was. So we do a lot of outreach, trying to just make sure people understand what the risks are with ticks. So I encourage you to bookmark this site, de.gov/ticks. I've got some useful info on there. One of the tools we have on there that I think is the most useful, it's a tick interaction report. So basically you can upload a tick upload a picture of a tick that you found, either on yourself, on a pet, on a child, whatever, or just crawling around. Um, it's actually going to come straight to my inbox, so I'll be the one who looks at it, identifies it. If it's a clear photo, I can probably get you an identification quickly. I try and provide that in what I call a medically useful time frame, so that um, I'm not a medical doctor, so I'm not going to tell you like, oh, need to do such and such because you were bitten by this tick, but I try and help you evaluate your risk. So I will tell you, you know, for example, like, oh, this is an adult deer tick. We're finding that, these have high probability of being infected with the pathogen. So it might be in your best interest to consult medical a medical professional. So just kind of give some guidance on next steps to take. But again, with that caveat that I'm a tick expert, but not a medical doctor. And since we launched this tool in 2022, about 400 ticks have been reported this way so far. So it's helping me to figure out, what kind of ticks are people encountering here in Delaware. And it also helped me learn some of the like misconceptions or, things that people are getting wrong about ticks. So for example, someone submitted this photo. It's a great photo. I can tell right off the bat, like the species and the sex and the life stage of this tick. This is an adult female American dog tick. But the comment that came in with it said, picked up this deer tick while walking my dog this morning. So they assumed it was a deer tick and it's not. So they might, misunderstand their risk from that perspective. And then also, I can tell from looking at this tick, it is highly engorged. I would say it was feeding for at least 5 days. So they didn't pick it up when they were walking the dog that morning. And again, this can lead them to kind of misunderstand their level of risk. So a tick that's been feeding on you for 5 days is going to be more dangerous than one that you just picked up that morning, because the longer they're attached to you, the more opportunity they have to transmit pathogens to you. So, 5 days would certainly be long enough to transmit pathogens. Oops, sorry, I went too fast. Okay. So it's just some common sense tips for tick bite prevention. When you go outside, I would recommend that you wear repellent, and there's different products that if you follow the label directions, you'll be in good hands. They'll tell you, how to apply it, how often to reapply it. Some products have permethrin, and those products are meant to go on your clothing or on your shoes. If you're applying directly to your skin, you want one with either DEET or oil of lemon eucalyptus as the main active ingredient. I recommend wearing light colored clothes because that'll make it easier to spot the ticks. Tall boots make it harder for the ticks to grab onto you. And most of them are going to be grabbing on like at boot level. So they're not going to be falling out of the trees. They don't climb trees. They don't fly. They don't jump. They start on the ground and they crawl up, and they usually won't go higher than 12 inches. So typically they'll grab onto you at like ankle height or thereabouts. And I think, sometimes people find a tick on their head and they think it must have come from above, but ticks are just very stealthy. So I think it just crawled its way up without being detected. Um, anything you can do to make it harder for the tick to find your skin. So, wear long sleeves, wear pants, tuck your pants into your socks, tuck your shirt into your pants. And then stay on the trails, try and avoid brushing up against the vegetation and the tall grass. So stick to the middle of the path if you can. And then most importantly, make sure you're doing tick checks frequently and regularly anytime you've been in tick habitat. To keep your pets safe, I would say if it's at all possible, keep your cats inside all the time. Then you just don't have to worry about it for them. And for your dogs, keep them up to date on tick preventatives. And this helps to keep you safe too. So I think this is kind of fun. My dogs are on a tick preventative that will kill the tick after it bites them. So they'll go around the yard, they'll still pick up ticks. It's not going to repel the ticks, but it will, after the tick bites them, it'll kill them within 24 hours. So I think of it as I'm sending my dogs out into the yard to sweep up the ticks for me and kill them. So I love that. And then include your pets in your regular tick checks, and just remember the longer they're attached for, the more likely they are to transmit pathogens. And then to keep your yard safe, there's some different, landscaping hacks you can do. And I know Probably if you're here, if you're here at the nature center, you probably like nature and you probably want on some level for your yard to be good wildlife habitat. I know I do. So sometimes the guidance you get about tick safety runs counter to what you hear for having wildlife habitat in your yard. So the way that I kind of strike a compromise there is, identify the parts of your yard where you spend the most time, the places where you recreate the most. Like if you had friends over for a cookout, like where are you going to be sitting, or like where are your kids or your dogs going to be, playing frisbee or something. So focus on those areas that get the most use, and in those areas try and make them really tick safe by keeping the grass short, removing leaf litter and brush piles, reducing the ground cover. And one way you could do that is by removing invasive plants. So I listed several different invasive plant species here that have all been linked to greater tick numbers. So things like multiflora rose, Japanese barberry, oriental bittersweet, and honeysuckle. You can make your trails wider. You can make barrier strips that are hard for ticks to cross with like wood chips or gravel. And then trimming some of the branches overhead to let more sunlight hit the ground. And basically, that all boils down to ticks are sensitive to desiccation. They hate drying out. So if you can make it warm and dry, that's going to be uncomfortable for them. And these pictures just show an intervention that was done to make this yard more tick safe. So they took this play set where it was on like the woody edge and they just pulled it into the sun and put some mulch under it to make it much less conducive to tick survival. And then my last tip for you is how to remove a tick. So the most important thing is to remove it as soon as possible. So, don't schedule an appointment with your doctor to have them remove it. I heard some people do that, but it's much more important for you to just pull it out yourself right away. Because the longer it's attached, the more likely it is to transmit a pathogen. I would grab some tweezers and you try and grab the tick as close to the skin as possible, and then just slowly and steadily pull it away from the skin, trying not to twist it or jerk it because you don't want part of it to break off and stay in your skin. If that happens, it's not the end of the world. It's kind of like having splinter. It'll work its way out eventually. Um, and after removing the tick, you can clean the bite area either with rubbing alcohol or soap and water. Now, I recommend that you save the tick for identification. I would say snap a photo, send it to me. de.gov/ticks. And then after you've done that, check for more ticks, because if you got one, that means you were in tick habitat, so you could have gotten others. And that's all I have for you. And I'll leave you with my contact information in case you think of a really good question later that you didn't think to ask right now. But I'm happy to take any questions either from the chat or from the room. Sure.
Yeah, my family has a farm in Virginia, and every summer, brothers and I go in the woods, chiggers and ticks and whatever. But one of the things, and we had all kinds of poultry, and guinea fowl, my grandfather swore was the best tick preventer there was. They were always out in the wild meadows and everything, and consuming. Is that true, or are they more?
Okay. So the question was about, like, do guinea fowl provide effective tick control? And there was a really interesting study on this in the 1990s. It was done in New York, and one of the interesting fun facts about it, one of the authors on that paper was supermodel Christy Brinkley, believe it or not. So she actually has a few publications to her name. And I will say, unfortunately, that original study from the 1990s that suggested that guinea fowl could control ticks, more recent studies have failed to replicate that. So it's had mixed results. And there are some species like guinea fowl and chickens that they'll eat ticks kind of opportunistically. If they're grooming themselves and they see a tick, like sure, they'll snap it up, but they're not really doing it at a rate that's going to provide like landscape wide tick control. Yeah, yeah. Thanks for asking the question.
What do you recommend for tick?
So what do I recommend for tick control? Well, like I said, there's no magic bullet. If you have a really bad infestation where it is just making you can't be outside in your yard because it's just miserable. Like I would say that's certainly a situation where spray would be called for. Now I don't recommend everybody spray for just, when they're only seeing a few ticks here and there, because unfortunately the sprays that are effective against ticks, they're not very targeted. They tend to be these broad spectrum pesticides, so it's going to take out some, collateral damage with your beneficial arthropods like your pollinators and your caterpillars and so forth.
Some malathions, I think.
Yeah, so there are definitely effective products, but I would say, yeah, I'll recommend those to the people who are in the worst kind of tick situations. And believe me, I've been in places where I would recommend spraying, sure. Um, Now, one thing you can do to protect specifically against the black-legged ticks that carry the agents of Lyme disease and so many others, um, has anyone heard of tick tubes? Tick tubes are a product that looks like a little toilet paper tube, but it's full of cotton, and the cotton has been treated with permethrin. And you put that around your yard. When you buy the product, it will tell you, it'll give you specific directions for how many you need to put out and how frequently you need to replace them. But mice will come and use that cotton as nesting material, and it will kill all the ticks on the mice. And so that has shown some success. Uh, and that works on a small scale. It's hard to like scale up. We can't really be doing that across the whole state or in the state parks, for example. But for a homeowner just worried about ticks in their backyard, that that shows a lot of promise. I will say it's not going to help you if Lone Star ticks are your biggest problem, and the reason for that is Lone Star ticks don't feed on rodents. So black-legged ticks do, but Lone Star ticks are feeding on deer at all three of their life cycle stages. They love deer. So we've got some management methods that are targeted towards mice, and we have others that are targeted towards deer. So for Lone Star ticks, you could try a deer targeted method that tends to be more expensive, more logistically difficult. There's deer removal, but you've got to get the deer population density down so low that it's basically impossible. And then there's a deer four-poster stations. This is like a station that you fill with corn, and it's basically to as bait to lure the deer in. And to reach the corn, they brush up against a paint roller that's going to apply a permethrin solution to their head and neck, so it will kill the ticks on the deer. So that does show that there's studies showing that was very effective, but it does get very expensive. You've got to keep refilling it with corn, refilling it with pesticide. Our ticks are active year round, so you've got to kind of keep it going year round. And it's something that it's technically legal to do this in Delaware. In some places, it's not legal because feeding wildlife in some places is not allowed. And that's because it concerns like bringing animals together where they might exchange pathogens. Like if we were ever to get chronic wasting disease in Delaware, which knock on wood, it has never been detected here. But that's a very serious disease in deer. So as soon as I can pretty much guarantee, as soon as that shows up here, nobody's going to be allowed to feed deer anymore. So yeah, controlling the Lone Star ticks is a lot harder. But I would say if you've got a really serious infestation, I would recommend spraying. Sure.
Specifically draw ticks. Well, someone told me she would never have iris again because she thought that they were full of ticks.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. So the question was if certain plants will actually attract ticks, and specifically like is iris one of those plants? And I've never heard that about iris, so I wouldn't be too worried. And I don't think that ticks are seeking out any specific plant, but the reason that certain species of plants have been linked to increased tick survival is that these ticks, the plants kind of help to create the perfect microhabitat that has everything the tick's looking for. So a lot of these plants that will grow, close, like that understory, like that shrubby understory layer, it's going to help to keep the soil moist, which ticks love. They love high humidity. So it's really more about the humidity than the specific like identity of the plant. But yeah, a lot of those invasive plants that have been linked to ticks, what they have in common is just kind of like how they grow like so thickly and almost in kind of like a monoculture where they're covering the ground and making it very humid and not as like open and airy and dry as it would have been otherwise.
So ticks have probably been around for what, millions of years?
Yes.
So why suddenly do we have this explosion
Oh gosh, that is such a good question.
of diseases and stuff?
Yeah.
I mean, if we go back to, let's say, Egypt or something, the pyramids, did they find Lyme disease and stuff in the,
Oh,
you know?
this is
I mean,
okay.
I'm
This
making
is
exaggeration.
no, this is such a fun question. Okay, and the question is, we've had ticks for millions of years, so why all of a sudden are they causing so much trouble? And actually, have you heard of the um the Iceman that was found in the Italian Alps, and
yeah.
he's thousands of years old. I want to say he's like 5,000 years old. He had Lyme disease. They found the Lyme bacteria in in his tissues. So it has been around for a long time. So the reason ticks are a bigger issue today than they probably were for the Iceman, um, it has a lot to do with our changing land use. So as we've really developed certain places like Delaware, we've taken big forests, and kind of chopped them up into smaller fragments of habitat, and those habitat fragments really help ticks to proliferate because it's creating the perfect habitat for their hosts too. So deer, and mice tend to flourish in these fragmented ecosystems. Um, and then also it's not helping that on average we're seeing shorter, milder winters. So ticks have a multi-year life cycle, so they've always been adapted to be able to survive the winter. But a really cold, tough winter would knock the population back a little bit. But when we have one mild winter after another, and you never really get that knockdown, so the population keeps growing. Um,
Just trying to get the chronological order of things. You
Mhm.
said the female lays the eggs, okay, those eggs when they hatch, they don't have any pathogens, all right? And they have to find a host, like a white-footed deer mouse or a rabbit or something like that. Where did the white-footed deer mouse
Ooh,
or the rabbit get the
okay.
pathogens if they just came out of, they were born?
Yeah. I mean, that's a great question. So the question was, the ticks that are feeding on these wildlife hosts, where are those hosts getting the pathogen from? So it really is just a cycle. Those hosts are getting it from other ticks that came before. Um, yeah. So some of these hosts, we call them reservoir hosts because they just have the bacteria or the pathogen, I should say, um, present in their bloodstream, in their tissues. Just it's and it can be really hard to, even if we knocked back the tick population, you know, ticks could reinvade from somewhere else, and we might still have these pathogens in the wildlife reservoir, so the ticks would still continue. So it's a cycle. Ticks get it from the mice get it from the ticks, and repeats it ad nauseum. And even so, the white-footed mouse is the most important reservoir for Lyme disease. Like, so many of them are carrying it. Um, but even if we didn't have the mice, there are other species that can be reservoirs too. So chipmunks, birds, even there's a lot of birds that can carry the bacteria. So it's part of the reason it's such a complicated disease system is there's so many different players. Black-legged ticks feed on over 130 different species. Other ticks tend to be much more specialized. So black-legged ticks are like super generalists. Like they're not picky. Oh, thanks. You've been asking a lot of good questions. I like that.
We have one question and well, kind of comment question in the chat was that this person's friend got bit by a tick and it left a red bullseye mark, and they're curious what that's about.
Okay, yeah. So the bullseye rash is very uniquely tied to Lyme disease. So it's and a fun vocab word that I learned from studying Lyme disease is that rash is considered pathognomonic, which means I might not be pronouncing that right, but what it means is it's so uniquely linked to Lyme disease that rash alone, in the absence of any other symptoms and in the absence of any blood test results, could be used to diagnose Lyme disease. Now, some caveats about the rash are that not everyone gets it. I tell people if you get the rash, you're actually really lucky because now you know you have Lyme disease. There's nothing else that it could really be mistaken for. Um, and other people, don't get that rash that might delay or complicate the diagnosis. Um, or in some cases they'll get the rash, but it doesn't look like that perfect, target bullseye. Um, so the CDC has a really good page that shows, they've compiled pictures, different images of the rash, what it can look like, different shapes that it can take, and also what it looks like on different skin tones, because often in messaging, you'll see it on really fair skin where it shows up really well, and then it can be harder to spot on darker skin tones. So there's a lot of good resources to help recognize different kinds of tick-associated rashes. Sure.
Didn't the name Lyme disease come from Lyme, Connecticut, where it was first?
That's right. Yeah, Lyme disease was named for Lyme, Connecticut. And so even though it's an ancient disease that's been with us at least since the Iceman's time, um, it wasn't really recognized until the late 70s, early 80s. And that was when there was this cluster of cases in Lyme. And it was specifically a lot of children who were developing arthritis. And that was weird for all these cases of juvenile arthritis to show up in a cluster. And then what they noticed, there was a pediatrician there who noticed that um, the children who also had ear infections got better. Their arthritis went away. And so he thought, well, I prescribed antibiotics for the ear infections and it must have cleared up the arthritis too. And that was how they realized that there's some kind of bacterial illness affecting these kids. And so they basically just started collecting ticks and looking for pathogens in them and got all the pieces together. But yeah, it did. The name came from Lyme, Connecticut, and but we do have a hotbed of Lyme disease here in Delaware. So I know some people think the risk must be worse in Connecticut, but we've got it pretty bad here. um, cool. All right. Well, thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you.